to go ahead and get us started so that we have plenty of time to do the full exhibit. And as people are coming in, I'll admit them. But welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm very excited about this event and the tour of galleries. And so I'm Christy Peters. I'm the Alumni Affairs Specialist for the UAB School of Engineering. And we thought it would be a really cool event to kind of showcase some things that are happening at UAB, including what's happening at AEIVA. So I'm going to turn it over to Christina McClellan, who is the Education Manager for AEIVA, and let her get us started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. As Christy said, I am Christina McClellan. I am the Education Manager for here at AEIVA. And if you haven't been to AEIVA, we're right across from both of the engineering buildings, but we are the art museum for the University of Alabama at Birmingham. We've been here since 2014. We do 6 to 8 exhibitions per year. And tonight we're going to see Marking Time Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration, but we're only going to be able to see a fraction of it. So if you want to come back and visit, we are open 12 to 5 Tuesday through Saturday. And that is you can book your tickets online at uab.edu/AEIVA, and then just go to the visit page, and then you can book your ticket from there. It is free. We're always free and open to the public. So I encourage you to come back and see more of the exhibition before it goes away on December 11th. And then we will transition in the spring to some really fun and interesting different types of exhibition with Lily Reeves, which is like a neon light installation, and then Sonia Young-James, who does sculptural textile type things. So we are a couple of housekeeping things first. So this is a participatory tour, and I am joined here on the screen but with Rachel Arntzen. She is my coworker from Art Play, because we are in part of this consortium called the Visual and Performing Arts. So Art Play is our education community outreach center, and Rachel is our campus and community outreach coordinator. So she joins me on a lot of these tours to help monitor the chat. Sometimes I will be asking you to drop your answers to questions in the chat. Sometimes I'll be asking you to unmute. If you can't drop it into the chat, unmuting is fine. We're a small group tonight, so I want to encourage you to do that if you feel comfortable doing that. I am also joined off screen by my intern Chloe, who is going to be helping me. She is going to help man the camera. So we have one camera up here, and then I'm able to see you guys down here. So when I'm looking down, I'm actually looking at you guys. I think that's about it for the housekeeping. If you have a question, feel free to interrupt me or drop it into the chat. Again, small group, so should be a lot of fun. All right, so I always like to start my tours out with a question. Oh, I'm sorry, one last thing. We will be shuttering in between when we move from one thing to the next. So just know when it goes dark, that's not your computer, that is us doing that, so that way you don't get seasick when we move from one piece to the other. Okay, all right, so I like to start my tours off with a question. And when I say the word mass incarceration, what is the first word that pops into your mind? And you're welcome to unmute or drop that answer into the chat. So just one word, when I say mass incarceration, what comes to mind?
Honestly, suffering is what I think of.
Suffering, okay.
Prison.
Prison, all right. Any other words? So prison tends to be our number one word that comes to mind. And so as we go through this exhibition, we're going to be exploring that concept of incarceration on multiple levels. This exhibition was created by Nicole Fleetwood. She is a curator out of New York University. She got the idea for this by looking at the artwork in the prison when she would visit her cousin. And in the visitor room, they would have artwork created by prisoners all up on the walls. And she realized this was a way for her cousin's friends to communicate with people in a way and express their ideas and their individuality in a way that they couldn't before. But it's also looking at what does incarceration really mean? So we're going to see artwork from the vein of time, matter, and space. So another question for you guys is, what is your favorite piece of furniture in your house? with college students, this one's actually easy.
Shoot, probably my couch.
Yes,
Just
yeah.
because it's comfortable, that's all.
Right, yeah. So for us as adults, it's usually the couch. For college students, it's usually the bed. And so the reason for that is what you said was comfortable. So when we think about comfort, what does that mean to us? And usually the answer we get is that A, it's a place to rest, but also it's a feeling of being safe. So comfort is more than just being able to rest your bones, it's being able to rest your mind. Ron Mckeithen, who's one of the artists that we'll see at the end of this exhibition, he got out of prison after 30 years, went to a mutual friend's of my house, sat on their couch, and yes, their couch is very comfortable, but he said, this is the first time I have felt comfortable in over 30 years. And it wasn't because he was able to rest on a very comfortable couch, it's because he was able to rest his mind. So when you're in prison for long periods of time, because mass incarceration is, we have the most amount of people out of any other country in the world in prison. We have the greatest percentage of our population than any other country in the world in prison, but also we're imprisoning them for very long periods of time. So they have to conceptualize their understanding of comfort, of time, of matter, experiences of space. So we're going to look at our first piece of artwork right here behind me, and you can either unmute or drop into the chat. What does this remind you of? What does it look like to you guys?
It looks like school lunch to me.
Yeah.
In the chat, we have elementary school.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so a lot of people, it reminds, particularly if you went to a public middle school, high school, elementary school, it looks like your cafeteria tables. This is actually,
we have another interesting one, weightlifting machine.
Oh, I can kind of see that. I can definitely see that. But none of these answers tell us comfort, right? This is not something that's meant to be comfortable. Sable Elise Smith, who is the artist, her father is currently in prison in California. These are replications of the visitor benches and chairs and tables that she sits at when she visits her father in prison every year. Now, the thing is this may be the most comfortable piece of furniture for her father in prison because it's when he gets to see her, not because it's a place to rest, not because it's a safe space for his mind. It's simply because it's where he gets to see them, to see his family. So now we're going to go into the exhibition, and we're going to shutter real quick. And thank you, Chloe. We're going to go into the exhibition. And so as we do so, if you can either unmute or drop into the chat, what does the passage of time look like to you? So when you close your eyes and you think back on your life, what is it that you are actually thinking about?
Just isolated memories, I guess.
Memories? Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Rachel, was there something in the chat?
Yeah.
Yes, a river.
A river.
Family.
Excellent.
And I'm
Family.
sorry,
Okay.
I was coming off of mute and just thinking about things you could have done better or differently.
Yeah. So experiences, it is the memories. So a lot of times it's milestones. So specific things like our graduation, when we got married, when we have kids, relationships. I love the answer of a river because it almost gives you that visual of kind of going through life. What a wonderful answer. So this piece behind me is by Mark Lafney. We're going to start getting in a little bit closer now. And Mark Lafney is currently incarcerated in Pennsylvania, and he has been working on this piece since 2014. There are 725 portraits in this exhibition. And so there's actually now 750. He's created 25 more since the summer, but he has been working on these, and he's drawing people who are currently in prison with him. So what I want as it stands, it is, of course, a great way to pass time. It's a great way to look at time in the guise of the relationships that he may or may not be forming with these men. But it serves kind of a secondary purpose. So pictures that we normally see of people coming out of prison are what usually? Mugshots, right? So what is different here? And you're welcome to unmute and say, what are you seeing in these pictures that you don't see in a mugshot, or vice versa? What are you seeing in a mugshot that you're not seeing in these pictures?
Well, some individuality, styles of clothing that tell you about the person rather than, something that's just a snapshot that's not supposed to show any of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have individuality. I love that answer. Why did you say individuality? So the clothes, obviously.
When you're a prisoner, you're a number, and that's the whole, some of the point of it, I guess, the dehumanization of it. This is the opposite of that in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. So we don't see a prisoner number on them. In a mugshot, you tend to be looking straight on or straight to the side. And then you have that prisoner number right in front of you. What else are people noticing?
I don't think they look like prisoners. They really just look like a collection of, like an artist just did a collection of portraits, and just that this is a everyday scene. Like, everyone may, it may have been an instruction to say, I'm going to do a portrait and wear a white shirt, but it doesn't give you the feeling that everyone that's in the portrait is a prisoner.
Absolutely. So I think one of you had said restored some dignity, and then for you to kind of bring that all into one thing, they are not a label, right? So we've shunned that title of a label, and we are allowing ourselves to see that person because they are pictured as a portrait. So we're going to shutter and go to another portion of this, because this is 3 walls, and I want to make sure we see one in particular. But as I talk, the mugshot, you're either looking straight on or straight to the side. It's a moment of fear. It's a moment of shock. It is meant to judge. It's meant to create that label of, this is someone who has done something wrong. And so we'll go ahead and unshutter here. Mark Lafney, who is the artist right here, I normally make you guess if you're in the gallery with me, but this is the artist here. He is actually looking straight at you, but that's because he's having to look into a mirror in order to do the portrait, because it's a self-portrait of himself. Everybody else is looking off in the distance. He wanted to make sure that he was able to restore dignity to these men by allowing us to get to know them themselves, get to know them as men. As you said, restored dignity to them. So the name of this piece is Pyrrhic's Defeat, and it is a visual study of mass incarceration. And so this is a living piece. So in this exhibition, it is a traveling exhibition. When it goes to the next venue, it will have 750 portraits. When it goes on to the venue after that, it will have even more. So it's a very interesting piece. You can also see right down here that COVID starts somewhere in there. And what COVID looks like in the prisons is basically going into solitary confinement. So it's been very hard for him to be able to get in the same room as other men in order to create these portraits. So it is a great example of passage of time, being able to mark that time, but also kind of giving us an overview of those other things of matter, M-A-T-T-E-R, as well as space. So we're going to shutter and go to our next piece. And this is a piece by Dean Gillespie. He is currently out on the Ohio Innocence Project. And he is, we're gonna have to pull that. Great, thank you, Chloe. Okay, so he has created 5 miniatures that are being shown in this exhibition. And each one is being created with materials that either he is allowed to have, but also not allowed to have. And eventually he had to create all these in secrecy and then eventually smuggle them out. How he did that, I'm not sure, but I do know how he got his materials. He had to trade and barter for a lot of them. And for example, this piece that we're about to look at right now, he needed needle and thread to get that, to create that. So a lot of these pieces have little needles on them. And Chloe will go on to the next pieces. Yeah, that's fine. And each one is an example of how he conceptualized time. He, in his own words, said, I needed to create these in order to not just pass time, but to keep myself sane. So each of these are miniatures created of places that he remembers from his childhood. And then on top of that, he needed a way to hold on to his individuality and creativity. So each one has the name Spiz in it. Spiz is his nickname from when he was a child. And he's living in that kind of moment of nostalgia. This is his way of holding on to his identity and his creation, but it's also a way of creating experiences and relationships for himself as he had to barter to get a lot of these materials. So speaking of experiences, we'll move on now to our next piece as Chloe comes to put it back on the bench here. We'll move to this piece that is directly behind these pieces. It is by Jesse Crimes. Let me help you there. We're having a slight technical issue with the dolly, but all right, there we go. All right, you can go ahead and unshutter from here. So this piece by Jesse Crimes is 39 different panels. Each panel is made out of a bed sheet, a prison bed sheet. So Jesse was a trained artist before he went into prison. And when he got into prison, he realized I needed to do something to kind of exercise that creative side of my brain. He immediately applied to be able to use the art studio in the prison, and he was granted access. And he decided I needed to do something to really be able to conceptualize and understand my experience in here. And so Chloe will bring this a little bit closer. I don't think you need to shutter if you want to just come straight up. Each panel is created by taking media from, so print media, so newspapers, magazines and such, and transferring the images on them using hair gel and a spoon onto the back of these prison sheets. He then would turn it over and draw on the prison bed sheets these ballerina type figures using just pencils and color pencils. The bottom layer, so there's 39 panels. Each panel takes about 3 months to create. Once the panel, because this is contraband, he's not allowed to have this prison bed sheet. He had to smuggle each panel out individually as he created it. And then there's 39 of them. So the bottom row represents hell, the middle row represents earth, and the top row represents heaven. Each one, 3 months to create approximately, 39 panels. It's a little over 3 years for him to create this entire piece. He does not get to see the full thing represented in its entirety. So the whole thing, he does not get to see it constructed until he leaves prison. So we're going to shutter now, and I would like to ask you guys, as we move to the next piece, colors. What types of colors, when we talk about incarceration, do you normally associate with prison or incarceration with that word? So what colors are coming to your mind when we say the word incarceration?
Two colors. I think of grays. But the other thing I think of is also sometimes at least in some of the like movies and representations I've seen, they'll paint the walls in especially bright color just to try to bring some brightness to it, which is I don't know if that's dubious or not, but I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've.
Yeah, absolutely. So grays, but then maybe occasionally a bright color like an orange, right? Rachel, I saw some things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have black, white, and gray, and then orange and or duller tones.
Yep, absolutely. So we usually those are grays or beiges, and then usually the main big color that pops to our mind is orange. So we'll go ahead and unshutter here. And if I could get a volunteer to describe to me what you think you're seeing. So like just physically describe it. What is it that you're seeing?
It looks like maybe uniforms that you see in, or clothing that you would see in a prison, perhaps. Not really sure. I see other things too. I see pages and other things.
Yeah, it looks
Yeah,
like
absolutely. Go ahead.
wet laundry is what it looks like to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely see, we can see there's a collared shirt down here, maybe the pants or something going up here, or maybe the rest of the arm. We have socks, little red socks going on, but we have newspapers, and I actually have not been able to figure out what the yellow is. I think it's actually bedding, but it's what we tend to see in this exhibition is you end up seeing a lot of blues. So the color that really pops into our mind is orange, because Orange is the New Black, that TV show. We also have the grays, we also have the beiges and things like that. Those tend to be standard answers, but we don't tend to think of blue. And did you know there is a color that is carceral blue? So the blue that is really used for uniforms or other things. But we see varying degrees of blue within this exhibition. This one in particular is the floor wax that the artist Gilberto Riviera would use when he was mopping the floors in the prison. So he had a very traumatic experience with a guard one time. And so he got very frustrated. And so he was encouraged by his friend, Jesse Crimes over here, to channel that into an artwork. Because again, if you speak out or if you try to express yourself in a way to advocate, sometimes that comes back in the form of punishment rather than having your voice heard. So you have to express and advocate for yourself in other ways. And this comes forward in the artwork. So the name of this piece is An Institutional Nightmare. The pieces of paper are some pieces of newspaper, but mostly they're commissary papers. So when you go to buy things from a prison, you're buying them at a marked up price. So you have to order them from the commissary. So that's where a lot of these are, but then there's also prison reports, and then also a couple of newspapers like this one down here. The red is the socks. I think the yellow is supposed to be the bedding. And then the beige is the uniform. And so we see these color palettes popping up through a lot of the artworks. It's very few artworks that we don't see it popping up in. So these visual cues are very important because it shows us what our society has kind of told us what incarceration is or should be, and then the reality is very different. So we're going to shutter now and go to the next piece. So while they were in prison, Jesse Crimes and Gilberto Riviera formed a art society amongst their fellow prison mates who were also doing art as a way to kind of understand and deal with their time while in prison. And one of those other friends was Jared Owens. And so Jared Owens really had a piece that he wanted to make, and he felt it was incredibly important to make. So before we unshutter, we're going to do a quick activity. We will take the shutter off of the camera for about 5 to 10 seconds. I want you to look at this piece. And then when we shutter, I would like for you to drop into the chat the first word that pops into your mind. All right, ready? Let's go.
We have boat, slave ships, boat.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So go ahead, Rachel. Boat, slave ship, and what else?
Rain, and then we also have tank.
Excellent. Okay, great. So if I could ask, the slave ship one is very interesting. Can I ask whoever had set that one to unmute, if possible,
Yeah,
and tell us why you saw that?
Because there's been there are a number of representations of slave ships, and they show how slaves were absolutely packed into these ships in horrible conditions. And it just reminded me of that when I was looking at the notches in the, it looks like one of those boats, and it looks like the representation of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I heard boat. Was that another similar reason?
Yeah, I thought slave ships, but you said one word, so ships.
There we go. Yes. So boat. Yes, absolutely. And then Rachel, was there not a variation of slave ship or boat, but was there another word that was in there?
There were two other words, rain and tank.
Okay, great. Let's start with tank. Why do we think tank? Okay, how about rain? Whoever said rain?
Window. I'm the one who said rain, and it seemed to me like a window with, rain coming down and then things blurry in the distance.
Yeah, particularly we've got this blue coming down, right? And so and then the lines and everything, I can definitely see how that looks like raindrops. What's really great is all of these answers are kind of hitting on the mark for what Jared Owens is trying to get across. So these three panels are made on wooden panels, which Jared had to smuggle in. He quotes that this was the 3 longest yards of his life, because if he had been caught, he would have gone into over 3 months of solitary confinement. That was the punishment if he had been caught, and all of his possessions would have been confiscated. So he felt, though, it was very important to make this piece, and he needed to get it out, and he needed to do it on wood panels. So the slave ship one is very spot on, because he took the outline of that famous picture of the slave ship that we see where slaves are how they packed them into ships. So he took that diagram and overlaid it on top of the schematics, or what he perceived were the schematics of the prison in which he was residing. And in order to comment on the overcrowding of his prison, and then how that leads to the let's see, there we go. So how that leads to the sorry, I just lost my train of thought. How that leads to the treatment of prisoners, and how that in turn leads to his definition of what he is to the system, where a lot of these people see themselves as slaves into this particular system. So we're going to shutter now and move on. So the matter is, something that has mass and takes up space. And so for Nicole, in her thesis in creating this exhibition and the book that accompanies it, matter is not just things that you can hold, so the things that are contraband or the things that you're allowed to have. It is also the colors, it's also the experiences. But when we have space, so matter takes up space, space then becomes twofold definition as well. It's not only the physical space, the actual prison itself, but it's also the headspace in which those experiences exist. So we're going to very quickly, or not so quickly, we want to make sure you see the artwork. We're going to be looking at these pictures by Chandra McCormick and Keith Calhoun. So we'll pause at each one individually. And as we do so, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. So Chandra and Keith are professional artists. They've dedicated the majority of their career to photographing penitentiaries throughout the United States. In particular, they have been photographing Angola Penitentiary, which is Louisiana State Penitentiary. So Angola is a nickname for it. Angola is what is known as a penal farm. So a farm is where we grow crops, where we raise livestock. In particular, this one, they're growing crops. I'm not sure what crops they are growing, but they are growing things that they are then having to harvest by hand. So as we look at all of these pictures, I would like for you to either drop into the chat or unmute and tell us, what is it reminding you of from your history textbooks?
It reminds me of sharecropping.
Mhm.
I mean, it reminds me of slavery, really, but it also reminds me of sharecropping.
Yeah, absolutely. Slavery in particular tends to usually be the #1 answer here.
We have
So-
plantations in the chat as well.
Yes, absolutely. Plantations, sharecropping, slavery. It's very hard to not see that resemblance. But what we really like to do in art museums is break down why. Was that the words that really popped into our mind when we saw these pictures? Now, one of the obvious answers is they're in black and white. All these pictures were taken in the early 2000s. I think one was taken in the 80s, but so they're not from the 1800s. So why is that word slavery or plantations or sharecropping the words that are popping into our minds? So what are we physically seeing?
In the chat a little bit before, we had cotton fields.
Oh, yes. Also a good one.
So you're seeing an if you look to the far left, it's like you have an overseer there. You got a tower, you know, someone looking over and overseeing prisoners. You know, these things are intertwined, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go closer to that one real quick. So this one, you said the overseer. So when we look at this one in particular, I apologize for the shaking. Our floors are not even. This one in particular, we see a white man on a horse with a gun. And then he's overseeing, the majority of men are African-American or men of color. Angola is 75% African-American. We have a white overseer on a horse with a gun. The contrast between those two is very hard to not make that correlation. The name of this piece is actually Pick Up Your Tools, Corrections Officer, Angola Penitentiary, taken in 2012. So what else are we seeing? And I'll pull back. That tells us a correlation between the word slavery and or plantation or cotton fields. And I forgot what the other one was. What else are we seeing in these pictures?
I think just knowing that it's a Louisiana prison and our location with being in Alabama, it's something that we've seen before, that we're familiar with. So there lends some familiarity to it. And I mean, again, with it being in the black and white, it does kind of set that antiquated tone to where that would be the first thought, because we've seen these images locally and historically to where it doesn't look like it's changed.
Yes, absolutely. So we have that visual literacy and that historical context that we all bring to the table. So things like, particularly this one, if you can't see it really close up, you can't tell that they're wearing like khakis and jeans, things that you would not have had in the 1800s. And so if you can't see that, this looks like a picture that we have seen in a textbook of slavery. So when we're looking at these, we see very obvious correlations. Now, if we're going to try and decide, is this treatment, is what this prison is doing slavery, what questions do we have that go beyond the pictures? Because just these visual cues are a snapshot in time. They don't tell us everything. So what questions do we have?
Is it moral to make people do hard labor, among many other things, when they're in a quote unquote correctional facility? Is that even moral?
Yeah. Is it moral? Okay.
Then
What
we
else?
have some more in the chat. One is who profits, and then another one is are most wrongly convicted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to add to that, when my students are usually here, the first question they ask, are they getting paid? A lot of times, no. And then the other question that they tend to have is the who profits. But also, if you're growing something and you've never been able to keep your shamrock in your apartment alive, not telling a story on myself, maybe I am. If I'm able to keep that carrot alive in the ground while I'm in prison, I want to be able to eat that carrot, right? I want to be able to partake of it. Are they able to at least taste test the stuff that they've been able to grow, if it is food that they're growing? Again, I don't know what crops they're actually growing, but do they get to partake of it? And then the other question that particularly I see with my students is, what is the treatment like? If you're a football player, you have to, and you're practicing during the summer in Louisiana, you have to take X amount of breaks at X amount of times, and you have to be monitored to make sure you're drinking X amount of water. Are those rules applying to these men as well? So are the rules different? And then also usually does the punishment fit the crime? Varying degrees of questions around that. So these are all things when we start looking at artwork. Artwork is a great lens to be able to help us start to see and understand and question a very difficult topic. And so it's really important to be able to shift our gaze and look past what we're seeing, what draws our attention in a picture, and then be able to see what's in the margins, but also question what's there and what we're seeing. So we're going to shutter. And was there a question as we do that? And we're going to set up for our next piece.
Yeah, there is a comment, prison is another form of slavery.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's definitely the view of the curator as well. Yes, we're going back, we're going to this one, yeah.
And I wanted to add a comment on that last picture where you can see them on the field. Mm-hmm. If you look at the background, I mean, you can see the trees in the background, but it looks like it's wintertime. Like it looks like it's like the end of the year and the crops are barren. So, and again, we don't know what they're planting, but it almost looks as if like, I mean, what are they working towards? Because there's nothing there. You know, it doesn't look like it's, you know, the season to do any of that, you know. So that is what kind of jumped in my mind. It's like they're doing all of that work, but is their labor even fruitful?
Absolutely. No, that is something that I have also noticed and wondered what time of year. And actually, let me go back and see if it gives me the time of year over here. It does not. It was taken in 1980, but that's all I know. So I don't know what time of year it was, but it's a good point that the stark contrast between the bare trees and then, you know, the empty fields, and then they're still having to toil by hand. What is it that they're actually working towards? It's definitely a beautiful but eerie composition for a picture. So thank you for that. This piece here. So we've talked about an artist who's currently incarcerated with Mark Lafney, formerly incarcerated, which were the majority of our artists in the second gallery. We've talked about artists as advocates who are on that back wall there. The last type of artist we're going to talk about now is a victim. So Rowan Renee was molested by their father when they were a child. I don't know what happened. I don't know if they actually, if they had reported it, or if the family reported it, or it didn't get investigated, or what happened, but basically nothing happened. He stays out of prison. He doesn't get taken to jail, nothing, he doesn't get investigated. And so Rowan grows up. Later on, their father does get caught and is tried and convicted of 2 counts of lewd and lascivious behavior with a teenage boy. He goes to prison. He dies very shortly into his prison sentence. When he dies, all the case files come back to them from the department. And so Rowan then has to deal with the fallout. A, justice has not been served for them, but B, the family kept it a secret, particularly domestic and sexual abuse and violence has a massive stigma around it. If you report it, oftentimes that comes back on you and you start getting questions. And, you know, should we believe you or should we not believe you? And so a lot of these things don't go reported. And then on top of that, you don't want the neighbors to know. You don't want the community to know. You feel a sense of shame. And so the family kept the entire arrest, trial, and conviction a secret from their community. And I don't know how they were able to do this, but they did that. And so Rowan wasn't allowed to talk about it until after their father died. And so it creates almost like a cage. So we see that represented in this artwork. We see, very interestingly, everything that's silk screened is from those case files, but also the newspaper clippings. So I will have Chloe shutter real quick, and she's going to come around and show you the inside of this piece. But inside the cages, we have silk screened newspaper clippings onto silk chiffon. On the back side, we have the actual case file. And so as we show you here, you can actually see his BOLO report. So the call for his arrest, and then the interview with the detectives, the transcripts from all of that. And she starts to really start to decompose these in different colors. Sometimes to people it looks burnt, sometimes it looks like blood. We don't really know the exact intent, but it's a way for Rowan to really be able to conceptualize their state of mind and how they feel about the prison system. Was incarceration the right answer? Was that the fitting punishment to the crime? And then on top of that, he wasn't being punished for the crime that he committed against them as a child. So through this piece, Rowan is really grappling with that. What's really interesting about this and other installation type works of artworks, it's a living piece. So every time it gets shipped to a different venue, Rowan goes and installs it so it looks different at every venue. And so it's like an evolving show, display of what's on their mind at that time. So Rowan is an advocate now for reforming the prison system and looking to be able to make that, make everything just work better and have punishments and rehabilitations fit the crime. So Nicole was very insistent on being able to include Rowan in this exhibition as well. We're going to shutter now and move on to another sculptural piece. And as I do so, are there any questions at this point? Because I know that one is a little bit of a heavier piece. No? Okay, great. All right, so we're now going to look at a piece by an artist called American Artist. Chloe is going to be walking around this piece with the iPad camera for you guys. And as you do, as you look at this piece, what is coming to your mind? What word is popping into your mind?
We have a quick question, Christina. How many of the artists have been able to visit the exhibit?
It's a good question. 5? We'll see. 2 came and installed. We've had a lot participate in programming, but to just visit and not be part of programming or not be installing, I think only 2. But there's a lot more that have come to see the exhibition, but have also been either participating in programming or something like that. And everyone in the exhibition that's alive, there's one person who unfortunately passed away last year. Everyone that is alive received an honorarium for their participation in the exhibition.
And then for the other comment, what does this look like? Someone says school desk.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Police riot gear barrier in the front, and there's books that are, I guess, symbolic of indoctrination into law and order under the desk as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got a school desk and we've got the books. So I'm gonna actually go read the books for you guys. It is Behind the Badge, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, I Love a Cop, and Black Lies, L-I-E-S, Matter. So we've got the school desk, we've got the riot shield, and we've got the books. What topics are popping into your mind seeing this? So
Wait.
I know indoctrination for law enforcement was one.
Police brutality. Yeah, I guess that's about it right now. I can think of offhand.
Yeah, okay, police brutality.
In the chat, we have children fearing police and also learning.
Yes. So police within communities in general as well. And so what was the other one, Rachel?
Learning.
Learning. So that goes into that as well. So when I have students come see this exhibition, the other thing that really pops into their mind is school shootings as well. So being protected or maybe having to protect themselves, that's another thing that pops into their mind. There's a lot of things that this piece can evoke. And it really depends on what your life experiences have been as well. So this piece in particular by American artists is called Blue 4. It is about Black Lives versus Blue Lives Matter debate, and really commenting on society's impact one way or another into that debate. So what is society saying is morally right or morally wrong? But then also what kind of training are cops getting? And then the flow of information between the two groups. But it's also a really good piece to be able to talk about mass incarceration as a whole. So when we think of mass incarceration, we tend to think of adult males. And the thing is mass incarceration doesn't tend to start just once you turn 18, 19, or 20. It starts a lot of time as children. And we talk a lot in our class tours about school to prison pipeline. And so what does the school environment, particularly if you're in a lower income school, teacher turnover rate is a lot higher. So you have a lack of stability maybe at home, but then you also have a lack of stability in the schools. And then, what does that environment breed? My intern did some research as we opened up this exhibition. A fact I didn't know before this exhibition started, they can statistically say your likelihood of going to prison based on your reading level in second grade. So reading levels are incredibly important. And so this filters into this school to prison pipeline. So what you do in school and how you're treated and your education level can filter into, will you end up in the criminal justice system? Will you end up being impacted by it? And at what age? So we have artworks in here created by girls in juvenile detention centers, ages 10 to 18. And it's a set of hoodies, and they created a fashion design and put it into the hood of the hoodies that they could wear in prison. The artist brings it back to the prison. They're turned away from the juvenile detention center because if the girls were to wear those, it would have been different than what everybody else is wearing. And so it would have been an expression of creativity and individuality at a time when that's important in a child's life. But they're being denied that. They all have to dress the same. They can't express themselves in the same way that I was able to growing up. And then what does that look like for your development into adulthood? So this piece is incredibly important. And a lot of times I really like to focus in on it because it's not just bringing up the issue of Black Lives versus Blue Lives Matter and how we can or can't reconcile that. But it also oftentimes brings us to what children go through, and that children are part of mass incarceration. So we're going to shutter and go to our next piece.
Christy,
And
6:53, just FYI.
Yes, yeah, we've got 2 more pieces left. So thank you. So when we think about mass incarceration, again, we typically think of men and adult men, but we shouldn't also forget children, but also women. Women are the growing number of our population in prisons right now. Asia Johnson, who is one of the artists that created the documentary for our, and I'll turn off this screen, so we've got a glare going on. Let me turn that off. Great, okay. So she created a documentary that we showed at our movie and tour night, which I think you can find online, maybe on YouTube, called Out of Place. Has a lot of great facts and statistics, but her point is trauma begets trauma and abuse begets abuse. All of these women you were looking at have or are currently serving life sentences, anywhere from 15 years to life to up to 75 years to life. The three women on the top are out of prison, either on parole. Judy here served 37.5 years, but was granted clemency by Governor Cuomo. The three on the bottom are currently still in prison serving life sentences. They are all survivors of abuse, but through their survival of abuse, they also committed trauma or abuse and ended up in prison. So it's just an important example that, what happened and is just simply incarceration always the answer here? Why or why not? And so Sarah Bennett is the photographer. She is actually the lawyer. She specializes in taking on women's cases of women who are imprisoned because they're survivors, or not because they're survivors of abuse, but abuse beget abuse or trauma itself. So we'll shutter now and go to our last piece.
I have a question in the
Yes.
chat. Was it self-defense?
So this is something that was really important from Nicole, the curator, was that she did not tell us what the crimes were for any of these artists. There's one or two we know, but that's because it's part of the piece. But when we associate guilt or innocence with a person, we are putting a label on them and we're not seeing them as people. And we are also saying that there's a population that deserves inherently to be incarcerated. And so she wanted to make sure that we didn't know, and I've purposely not looked into what crimes were committed that were innocence versus guilt. Unless, like Dean Gillespie, he brought it up in his panel discussion. So that's how I knew he was out on the Ohio Innocence Project. But that's a good question. Okay, so these last pieces here are by Alabama artists. They are actually I could probably put this down. These are all created by the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project. They are a set of artists who go into prisons here in Alabama. And so every single one of these people are currently or formerly incarcerated here in Alabama. Ron Mckeithen, who we talked about earlier, created this Black Lives Matter piece in December after he was released from prison. He used very colorful colors in order to really be able to fully express himself. He wasn't restricting himself to the colors that he was seeing around him. He was celebrating being out and out of prison after 30-something years. Tamika Cole here, if you've seen some of our advertisements for the exhibition, this is the artist that locked in a dark home. She was the artist, she was incarcerated in Tutwiler, had a very traumatic experience with a prison guard. And when that happened, she went to the art class. By the way, these art classes are sponsored by Auburn University. And she goes to this art class and she started drawing. And then eventually the act of unmaking a picture and then piecing it back together in the form of collage was a very therapeutic thing for her. And she was able to process that traumatic experience and tell her teacher via her art, something bad happened to me. I can't talk about it because if I do, I'm going to get in more trouble and I don't want to get in more trouble. So she was able to get that out through her artwork, as are many of these people. So as we're looking at these Alabama artists, I always like to conclude with asking, we all at the beginning had a word that came to our mind when we said mass incarceration. What word is coming to your mind after seeing this exhibition? And you're welcome to either drop it into the chat or unmute.
So we have hope.
I think of hope as well, but hope that's stifled but still comes through.
Determination, praying.
Yeah, these are the these are the words that we didn't think we would have in our minds after leaving, seeing an exhibition on incarceration. When we think of incarceration, we think of the space, the bars, the cells, the yard. It's usually just the space, but it's incarceration are the experiences and the people within those spaces. And once we get to know them, we better understand what it really means to have mass incarceration in this country. So art is that wonderful way to be able to start these hard conversations. These are very charged topics that we are trying to approach, and art is a really great way to start to have that conversation. So I know we're right at time. Thank you all for coming. Again, if you want to see more of this exhibition, this was only a fraction of it. I think we saw 12 pieces. There's, I think 50, maybe, well, you're seeing a lot of them right here, but there's a lot more to see. So I encourage you to come back. The exhibition's open until December 11th. We're right next to the engineering building. So be sure to, if you're on campus, come by 12 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday. We do recommend booking an appointment ahead of time. It is free, but if you do come off the street, we usually can be able to fit you into a time slot.
Thank you, Christina. This was really wonderful and educational.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Christy, for setting this up. I hope we can do this again. We're going to have a much more lighthearted exhibition in the spring. Neon lights, textile sculptures. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do it again.
It was a really great exhibit for us to see, and also I think for us to consider on things that, how does this affect us as citizens, but also the profession of engineering, and is there a way for that to play into making the system better and making those reforms and just changing. So thank y'all so much for doing this for School of Engineering tonight. This was fantastic, and just really appreciate y'all taking the time. And thank you to everyone who joined tonight. Thank you so much. We did record, so we'll post that out there. So if you had to join us later or pop off, or you want to share it with someone, we'll have that available. So thank y'all so much. I hope everybody has a great evening and a happy Thanksgiving next week.
Thanks all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.